Ma'am, step away from the lawn, Rick barked, clipboard in hand like he was the sheriff of suburbia. The Arizona sun was burning through my shoulders as I turned off the sprinkler, still gripping the hose. For a second, I thought he was joking, but his mirrored sunglasses didn't move, and neither did that vein pulsing in his neck. I wasn't committing a crime, I was just watering my grass. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of morning I used to love, the smell of wet earth, the hum of sprinklers up and down Maple Grove Drive, the faint sound of kids' laughter from 2 doors down. I had lived in my new home for 3 months, and every day still felt like a blessing. After years of saving, budgeting, and double shifts at the hospital, I had finally bought a small 3-bedroom house. Mine. No landlord, no noise complaints. Just peace. Or so I thought. Rick Dalton shattered that illusion the day he marched across my lawn like he owned it. "Miss Miller," he said, flipping through a stack of papers, "your grass exceeds the allowable height limit set by the Homeowners Association. Section 7B, page 12. You're in violation." I blinked. "Excuse me? It's grass, Rick. It's green. It's trimmed." He raised a hand, cutting me off. 1.5 inches above regulation. You'll receive a citation in the mail. $500. My stomach twisted. $500? For grass? Rick smirked. "You chose to live in Maple Grove. We take pride in uniformity here." His tone was oily, rehearsed, like he'd said it 100 times before. Behind him, I noticed a couple of neighbors peeking through their blinds, pretending to prune their roses. No one dared to interrupt him, not with that HOA badge dangling from his neck like a medal of authority. He scribbled something on his clipboard, tore off a yellow slip, and handed it to me. I looked down at the fine. It was already printed with today's date. He'd come here ready to humiliate someone. I tried to reason with him. "Look, I just moved in. Maybe I missed a memo, or—" "Not my problem," he snapped. "Rules are rules. Ignorance isn't an excuse." And just like that, he walked away. Slow, deliberate steps down my driveway, the sound of his shoes crunching against the gravel like punctuation marks to his authority. I stood there, gripping that piece of paper until it tore in half. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the notice spread out under the dim light. $500 for grass. My hands were trembling, half from anger, half from disbelief. I looked out my window at the yard, a perfect emerald green patch that I'd spent hours nurturing. It looked no different from anyone else's. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. I trimmed the lawn, even shorter than before, hoping that would end it. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe Rick was just enforcing rules too eagerly, but when I got home from work 3 days later, another envelope was taped to my front door, red stamped and sealed with the HOA's crest. Inside was a second fine. Same violation. This time, it came with a warning. Failure to comply will result in legal action, including possible lien on property. A lien. Over grass. My chest tightened. I sat down on the porch steps, staring at that paper until the sun dipped below the houses. Somewhere in the distance, I heard Rick's laugh echo from the cul-de-sac, that same smug tone that burned into my memory. I didn't know it then, but that laugh would be the start of a war I never asked for. One that would end with me owning the very ground he parked his car on. I caught them at 6 a.m., Rick and his sidekick snapping photos of my yard like I was under surveillance. The morning air was still cool, heavy with dew, and there they were. 2 men in polo shirts, creeping along my driveway with phones held out like paparazzi. The flash from one of their cameras flickered across my bedroom window, waking me. I pulled on a robe, stepped outside, and shouted, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rick didn't flinch. His assistant, a younger guy named Todd, shuffled nervously behind him, clutching a measuring stick like it was a weapon. "Routine inspection," Rick said flatly, "just documenting non-compliance." "Non-compliance?" I stared at him. "I cut the grass twice this week. There's nothing wrong with my yard." He smirked, lowering his camera. "We'll let the board decide. Expect another notice." Then, without another word, He turned and strutted down the sidewalk, Todd scurrying after him. That was the morning I realized. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. Over the next 2 weeks, the letters came like clockwork. First it was the lawn again, then the mailbox color. Apparently off-white wasn't the approved shade of sandstone beige. Then the trash can placement, then my flower pots being non-uniform. Each envelope was colder than the last, the tone more threatening. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Persistent violations will be referred to the board. It was psychological warfare wrapped in bureaucratic language. Neighbors began to notice, but most avoided eye contact. Some whispered, "Just pay it and move on." Others crossed the street when they saw me outside. One evening, while trimming my hedges, my next-door neighbor Karen leaned over the fence. "You shouldn't mess with Rick," she said quietly. "He's made people move out before." "Over grass?" I asked. She shrugged. "Over anything he can." Then she closed her blinds. The loneliness was suffocating. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, behind curtains, behind blinds. It wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a fishbowl, and Rick held the net. I tried calling the HOA office, but my emails went unanswered. Finally, I found something while searching online. A small but powerful detail most people don't know. HOAs can't fine you indefinitely without due process. That means they owe you a formal hearing, a chance to defend yourself before the board. It's written right into the Arizona HOA statute, plain as day. So I requested a hearing, in writing. I cited the law, attached photos of my property, and dropped it off at the HOA office. I felt a flicker of victory, small but satisfying. For the first time, I had pushed back, but Rick didn't like being challenged. At the next board meeting, held in the community center, he made sure everyone knew I'd caused trouble. The fluorescent lights buzzed above as residents filled the chairs, the smell of coffee and paper lingering in the air. I sat quietly near the front, clutching my folder of evidence. Rick opened the meeting with his usual smirk. "We're here to address several recurring violations," he said, eyes flicking toward me. "Certain homeowners seem to believe they're above community standards." Murmurs rippled through the room. I stood. "I have documentation," I began, "and according to state law—" "Sit down," Rick snapped, slamming his hand on the podium. The sound echoed off the walls. "You're ruining the neighborhood with your attitude and your negligence." The room fell silent. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't move. I met his glare and said evenly, "No, Rick. I'm just not afraid of you anymore." When I saw Rick's truck parked at the county clerk's office, I knew he was hiding something, so I followed. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of dry Arizona day where the air felt like sandpaper and the sun glared off every windshield. I had taken the morning off work to drop off some forms when that familiar white F-150 with the Maple Grove HOA president decal caught my eye. Rick wasn't the type to deal with public records. He liked control, not transparency. So what was he doing at the county clerk's office, parked where only property filings and tax records were handled? I waited. 20 minutes passed before he emerged, clutching a thick manila envelope. He glanced around, paranoid, twitchy, before tossing it onto his passenger seat and driving off. Something in my gut said whatever was in that envelope wasn't supposed to see daylight. And for the first time since this nightmare began, my fear started turning into curiosity. That evening, I decided to do what he didn't expect. Fight back with facts. I dug through the HOA bylaws, page after tedious page, until I found it. All financial and meeting records shall be made available to members upon written request. A legal doorway. And Rick had left it wide open. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office, head held high. The receptionist, a woman with a frozen smile, asked for my name. When I told her, she stiffened. "Oh, you'll need to speak with Mr. Dalton." Of course I would. Rick emerged from his glass-walled office, arms crossed. "What do you want now, Miss Miller?" "I'm requesting copies of all HOA financial records from the last 3 years," I said, sliding a printed letter across the counter. As a dues-paying member, it's my right. His smirk faltered, just slightly. We'll get back to you on that. I'll wait, I said. He stared at me, jaw tight, before retreating. 10 minutes later, the receptionist handed me a small stack of papers, barely an inch thick. This is all we have on file. I knew that was a lie. That night, frustrated and suspicious, I reached out to the one person in the neighborhood who seemed to know more than he let on, Jim Anderson, the retired treasurer. His name had been whispered around meetings, usually followed by, "He quit after Rick took over." Jim answered the door in worn jeans and an old baseball cap. His house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. When I told him what I was looking for, his eyes narrowed. "Rick still pulling his little power games?" he asked. "Worse," I said. "He's fining people into debt." Jim sighed, then motioned me inside. "I shouldn't get involved again. But if you really want to know, look at the landscaping budget." That's where the money disappeared. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a dusty binder. I made copies before I left the board. He thought I didn't, but I did. As I flipped through the pages, my pulse quickened. The same company name appeared again and again, Dalton Property Services. Rick's own business. Payments totaling over $40,000 marked as maintenance. Some of the invoices had clearly been altered. Whiteout marks, mismatched handwriting, missing signatures. Jim leaned back, shaking his head. He's been bleeding the association dry. Most folks don't question him because they're scared. I thanked him and took photos of every page. Later that night, I was driving past the community center when I saw headlights flicker in the HOA parking lot. Rick's truck again, this time with another car beside it. I slowed, lights off, and watched from a distance. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, shaking Rick's hand. Rick opened that same manila envelope and handed it over. They spoke in low tones, laughing occasionally. Then the suited man pointed toward the open lot behind the building. The one marked HOA property. No trespassing. I didn't know what deal they were making, but one thing was clear. Rick's corruption went deeper than fines and lawns. And I was about to uncover it all. "We'll flip the lot. Keep the cash quiet," Rick whispered to the developer. My heart pounded. I was recording every word. I was crouched low in my car, parked behind the line of juniper bushes across from the HOA's parking lot. The night was thick and humid, the orange glow from the streetlights slicing across the pavement. Rick's voice carried through the open window, casual but sharp, the voice of a man too comfortable breaking the rules. I had started recording the moment I saw him meet that same man from the other night, the one in the tailored suit and polished shoes. They stood beside Rick's truck, papers spread across the hood like it was their private office. "Once it's rezoned," the developer said, his tone oily and confident, "we can put 6 units here. Short-term rentals, premium rates, easy money." Rick nodded. "And the board doesn't need to know. It's just an unused community asset. I'll handle the paperwork." My hand trembled around the phone. Every instinct screamed to leave, to stop spying on a man who'd already made it clear he could make my life hell. But I stayed, because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone he'd bullied, every homeowner too afraid to speak up. I remembered something my attorney friend Dana had told me after the last HOA meeting. "You're in Arizona. It's a one-party consent state. If you're part of a conversation, or even nearby with legitimate purpose, you can record. Just don't trespass." I hadn't planned to record that night, but fate handed me the perfect moment. Rick leaned closer to the developer. "We'll split the profit 50-50. I'll just list it as landscaping enhancement in the budget. Nobody checks the fine print." The developer laughed, pulling out a silver pen. "You're bold, Dalton." "I like that." I zoomed in slightly, catching the documents between them. A purchase agreement with an HOA header. My heart was thudding so hard I could hear it over the night cicadas. Then, Rick's head jerked up. He looked around suddenly, eyes scanning the dark. I froze, sinking lower in my seat. My phone's red recording dot glowed faintly on the screen, and for one horrifying second, I thought he'd seen it. He turned back to the developer. Hold on, did you hear something? The other man frowned. Probably just the wind. Rick wasn't convinced. He took a step away from the truck, peering toward the bushes. My pulse spiked. I slowly tilted the phone down, praying the moonlight wouldn't reflect off the windshield. Then a car door slammed in the distance. Someone leaving the nearby complex. The noise distracted him, and he turned back toward the truck. I used that moment to stop the recording and slide down completely out of sight. Get those signatures in by Friday, the developer said, his voice fading as they climbed into their vehicles. The two engines rumbled to life and rolled out of the lot, tail lights glowing red as they disappeared into the night. For a few seconds, all I could do was sit there, shaking, breathing hard. My phone screen still displayed the timestamp. 12 minutes of pure evidence. It was enough to blow the lid off everything Rick had built his fake empire on. But as I started my car and pulled onto the street, a pair of headlights flashed in my rearview mirror. Bright, too close, following me. My heart stopped. It was Rick's truck. I turned the corner, trying to play it cool, but he accelerated. He must have caught a glimpse of me leaving the lot. By the time I reached my driveway, he was gone. But the message was clear. He knew someone had been watching, and if I wasn't careful, he'd find out it was me. The next morning, my car was keyed, my fence spray painted, and a foreclosure notice fluttered on my door. Rick had declared war. It didn't even look real at first. The bright red paint streaked across my white picket fence spelled one word: liar. My stomach dropped. My car's driver's side door was gouged in long, jagged scratches, deep enough to expose bare metal. The paper on my front door snapped against the wind, taped crookedly but stamped with the Maple Grove HOA seal. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. I stood there barefoot, still in my scrubs from my night shift, staring at the chaos like it was some kind of cruel joke. But it wasn't. Rick had moved from petty fines to full-blown destruction, and the timing couldn't be a coincidence. It was less than 12 hours after I recorded his secret deal in the parking lot. I tore the notice from the door and scanned it. According to the letter, I had failed to pay cumulative violation fees, totaling $3,200, a number Rick had completely fabricated. The fine had somehow multiplied overnight. The document claimed that the HOA had initiated foreclosure proceedings pursuant to community bylaws. Foreclosure. Over imaginary grass fines. My hands were shaking when I called the HOA office. The receptionist answered with her usual clipped tone. Maple Grove Association, how can I? Put Rick on, I snapped. Now. There was a pause. He's unavailable. Then tell him this. If he thinks he can scare me out of my home, he's about to find out what real documentation looks like. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I drove to Dana Price's law office, a modest brick building sandwiched between a coffee shop and a tax service. Dana had handled real estate disputes for 20 years, and when I told her about Rick, she didn't even blink. Let me guess, she said. He's one of those small-town tyrants who thinks an HOA is a personal kingdom. I nodded. He forged fines. I have proof he's pocketing HOA money. And now this. I slid the notice across her desk. Dana scanned it quickly, her brow furrowing. He can't do this, not legally. So, he's bluffing. More than bluffing. He's violating state law, she said firmly. HOAs can't foreclose without filing a valid lien through the county recorder's office. It has to be itemized, documented, and approved by the board. If he skipped any step, it's void. Her words gave me oxygen again. Finally, something solid. A lifeline. So what do? I asked. Document everything, she said. Photos, dates, emails, and keep that recording somewhere safe. If he's retaliating because you caught him in a deal, that's witness intimidation. File a report before he does. I left her office feeling a mix of fury and focus. For weeks I'd been reacting, trimming, paying, appeasing. Not anymore. Now I was building a case. That night I photographed everything. The car scratches, the fence graffiti, the forged foreclosure notice. I even took pictures of the red paint flakes that had fallen onto my driveway. Evidence, every bit of it. I stored digital copies in the cloud, just like Dana advised. By midnight, I was ready to crash. But just as I turned off the porch light, headlights swept across my living room. I froze. A police cruiser rolled up slowly, its blue and red lights flickering silently in the dark. Two officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting across the yard. One of them called out, "Miss Sarah Miller?" My throat went dry. "Yes?" The taller officer approached the porch, holding a clipboard. "We received a complaint from Mr. Rick Dalton. He's alleging you trespassed on HOA property and illegally recorded him." For a moment, the world tilted. He had beaten me to it. As I met the officer's eyes, one thought screamed through my head. Rick wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was trying to erase me. They used to wave at me. Now they crossed the street. Rick had poisoned the neighborhood against me. The silence was what hit hardest. Just weeks ago, my street had been alive. Morning joggers, kids riding bikes, neighbors gossiping over coffee cups. Now, it was a cold corridor of closed blinds and sideways glances. I'd step outside and feel it instantly. The weight of judgment. Rick had told everyone I was the troublemaker, the woman suing the HOA, the one costing the community thousands. The smear campaign worked. People stopped talking to me. My mail started showing up opened. My trash cans mysteriously disappeared twice, and someone even left a dead patch of sod on my doorstep. A twisted joke about my grass violations. I tried to ignore it, but isolation has a way of eating through your resolve. Even the sound of sprinklers, once comforting, now felt mocking. I knew I couldn't win this alone anymore. One night, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by piles of letters and photos, I thought of Jim, the retired treasurer who'd risked helping me once. I picked up the phone and called him. "Jim," I said quietly, "I think it's time the neighborhood knows the truth." There was a pause on the other end. Then he sighed. "You're right. But you can't just knock on doors. Rick controls the meetings, the newsletter, everything." "I'm not talking about meetings," I said. "I'm talking about the internet." Within an hour, I created a private neighborhood group chat on Facebook, invitation only. I added the few neighbors who hadn't completely avoided me yet, including a teacher named Melanie and a veteran named Carl. I started simple, posting photos of the forged notices, the vandalism, the HOA financial records Rick had accidentally shared. At first, it was quiet. Then, slowly, the replies started coming in. "This happened to us too. Rick fined me for a fence repaint, then hired his own company to fix it. My dues went up twice last year." No explanation. The thread grew fast. Within days, half the community was reading it, whispering about it, adding screenshots of their own letters. That's when Jim messaged me privately. I still have the original budget reports, the ones before Rick doctored them. I drove over to his house that same evening. He met me on the porch holding a thick folder. Inside were detailed ledgers, invoices, and meeting minutes with Rick's signature all over them. "These show every payment he made to his own business," Jim said. "He's been double billing for years." The next HOA meeting was standing room only. I wasn't even sure if I'd be allowed to speak, but when Rick started his usual speech about protecting property values, I stood up and interrupted. "Protecting, Rick?" I said, holding up a copy of the ledgers. "Is that what you call paying yourself 20 grand for phantom landscaping?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rick's face went pale, then red. "You don't know what you're talking about." Jim stood from the back. "She's right. I kept the originals." Rick stammered, his words tangling. Two board members exchanged glances, then quietly walked out, resigning on the spot. The crowd buzzed, some shouting for an audit, others demanding refunds. For the first time, Rick wasn't in control. His perfect grip on the community was slipping, one receipt at a time. When I got home that night, exhausted but exhilarated, I found an email waiting for me. The sender was anonymous. No name, no signature, just a blank subject line. I opened it and read the single sentence inside. "You can buy him out." I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Buy who out? Rick? The HOA? The parking lot? I didn't know yet, but something told me this message was about to change everything. Buy the lot? I laughed, until I realized it was legally possible. Rick's empire was about to crumble under a technicality. The anonymous email had been sitting in my inbox all night, burning a hole in my thoughts. I'd read it at least 20 times by the time I poured my morning coffee. You can buy him out. It sounded like nonsense, or a trap. But curiosity has a way of digging deeper than fear ever could. I started researching the next day. I dug through the county's online property records, cross-checking parcel IDs, boundaries, and ownership titles. That's when I saw it. A separate deed listed under the HOA's name. Lot 27B, Community Parking Area. The very lot where Rick had met the developer. At first, I thought it was just standard. All shared spaces are technically HOA property. But then, in the small print details, I noticed something odd. The lot wasn't part of the Maple Grove Master Trust. It had its own tax ID and billing address, meaning it wasn't protected under the HOA's general assets. It was standalone, vulnerable. That's when the idea hit me like lightning. If Rick hadn't paid property taxes on that lot, and given how sloppy he'd been with everything else, it could be eligible for public auction. I drove to the county assessor's office, heart pounding, palms slick against the steering wheel. The clerk, a kind woman named Sandra, looked up the record for me. "Oh," she said, frowning at her screen. "Looks like this parcel's delinquent. 2 years of unpaid taxes. It's scheduled for auction next quarter." I tried to play it cool, but inside I was buzzing. "If someone wanted to buy it," I asked carefully, "how would that work?" She smiled faintly. "Anyone can bid. You just need to register an entity and submit payment through escrow if you win." Anyone could bid, including me. I thanked her, walked out to my car, and sat there in stunned silence. Rick's entire plan, his secret deal, his intimidation, everything revolved around a property he didn't legally control. If I could get that lot, he'd lose not just the sale, but his leverage over the entire HOA. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly, staying off Rick's radar. I met with Dana, my attorney, who helped me set up a small LLC, Sunstone Holdings. On paper, it looked like a faceless investment firm. In reality, it was just me, my savings, and a growing sense of poetic justice. I spent nights calculating, budgeting, convincing myself I wasn't insane. I sold an old car, dipped into my emergency fund, and borrowed the rest from a credit union. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a modest bid. The morning of the auction, the county hall was buzzing with investors, the air thick with coffee, chatter, and competition. Rows of chairs faced a podium where a clerk read out parcel numbers like a bingo caller. I sat near the back, hoodie pulled over my head, trying not to look out of place. "Parcel 27B, Maple Grove Community Parking Lot," the clerk announced. "Starting bid, $2,500. My heart hammered. The room went quiet. Rick wasn't there. Thank God. He must not have known yet. A man in a gray suit started the bidding. $2,500. I raised my hand slightly. $3,000. He hesitated, then shook his head. No one else bid. The clerk paused. "Going once, twice. Sold to Sunstone Holdings for $3,000. The gavel cracked against the block, echoing through the room like a gunshot. I sat frozen, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and euphoria. $3,000. The exact amount Rick had falsely claimed I owed in fines. It was poetic symmetry, justice with a price tag. As I walked out of the courthouse, the Arizona sun blindingly bright, I felt the shift, power tilting quietly in my direction for the first time. But I also knew something else. When Rick found out what I'd done, he wouldn't go down quietly. Rick marched up shouting, "You can't block HOA access." I smiled, holding the deed. "Actually, I can. I own it now." The morning sun was cutting through the clouds when I hammered the last post into the ground. The sign was simple. Bold red letters on whiteboard. Private property. No HOA parking. The kind of sign that usually goes unnoticed in suburbs. But this one was different. This one stood on the lot Rick thought he controlled. The air was thick with the sound of whispers. One by one, neighbors drifted out of their homes, drawn by curiosity and gossip. They gathered along the sidewalk, murmuring in low tones as they realized what I'd done. Some smiled behind their hands. Others just stared, unsure whether to cheer or duck for cover. Rick's white F-150 came screeching around the corner like a bull charging red. He slammed the door, his face already flushed, jaw twitching with rage. "What is this?" he barked, pointing at the sign. "You can't do this. This is HOA property." I leaned casually against the post. "Not anymore, Rick." He blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean, not anymore?" I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a manila folder, the same kind he'd once carried to the county office. "Deed transfer, bill of sale, and tax clearance," I said, opening it for him to see. Lot 27B was auctioned by the county for delinquent taxes. I bought it through my company. His face drained of color, then filled again with red fury. You can't, that's fraud." "No," I said, meeting his glare. "That's public record." The crowd murmured louder now. Phones appearing in hands, cameras clicking. Even Jim was there, standing with his arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. Rick's composure began to slip. "You think this makes you smart?" he shouted. "You think you can undermine the board? You have no authority here." "Authority?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean like the authority you used to sell HOA land behind everyone's back? Or maybe the authority you used to fine people into silence?" He froze. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The audio recording filled the air. Rick's voice, crystal clear. "We'll flip the lot, keep the cash quiet." The developer's reply followed, oily and confident. 6 rental units, premium rates, easy money. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Phones zoomed in on Rick's face. His hands balled into fists. "You recorded me?" he spat. "I sure did. Arizona's a one-party consent state," I said, my voice steady. "Perfectly legal. And now everyone knows what you've been doing." He took a step forward, breathing hard, his nostrils flaring. "You don't understand what you've done." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You lost your lot, your leverage, and your cover-up, all in one shot." Rick's control shattered. He screamed, "You think this is over?" and lunged toward me, reaching for the phone still in my hand. For a split second, everything blurred. The sound of neighbors shouting, chairs scraping on pavement, the sharp crunch of gravel as he stumbled toward me. I stepped back, heart racing, clutching the phone to my chest. Then, the rising wail of police sirens cut through the chaos. 2 squad cars rounded the corner, lights flashing red and blue. The crowd parted as the officers stepped out, hands near their holsters. Rick froze, wild-eyed, chest heaving. One of the officers called out, "Mr. Dalton, step back and put your hands where we can see them." The other officer turned to me, voice calm. "Miss Miller, are you all right?" I nodded slowly, my hands still shaking. Rick's glare cut into me as the officers approached him. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Maybe, but as the sirens echoed through the neighborhood and the cameras kept rolling, I knew the tide had finally turned. Rick screamed, "She set me up," as officers pinned him to his own car. I didn't flinch. I had the receipts. The moment felt surreal, like watching a storm finally collapse under its own weight. The same man who had stalked, fined, and humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood was now face down against his white F-150, wrists in handcuffs, shouting to anyone who would listen that he was the victim. His face was red, his voice breaking between anger and disbelief. "I didn't do anything," he yelled as the officers read him his rights. The crowd stood frozen, some filming, some whispering. Jim stood beside me, arms folded, his voice low. "You did it, Sarah. You actually took him down." I didn't answer. My heart was still pounding too fast, adrenaline burning through every vein. I just kept my eyes on Rick, the man who once strutted through Maple Grove like a king. Now he looked small, cornered. When the officers opened the truck door, a stack of documents slid off the seat. HOA invoices, checkbooks, and even an envelope with the developer's logo. The officers exchanged glances. One of them muttered something into his radio. Within minutes, the scene had shifted from a neighborhood scuffle to a full-blown criminal investigation. They took Rick away that afternoon, and the quiet that followed was deafening. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. I walked back to my house, the crowd slowly dispersing behind me, and shut the door. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from relief. 2 days later, I got a call from the Arizona Department of Real Estate Enforcement Division. A calm female voice introduced herself as Agent Lisa Harrow. "Miss Miller," she said, "we've been informed about potential financial misconduct involving the Maple Grove HOA. We understand you have documentation that may support this." "Yes," I said. "I have proof of fraudulent expenses, false fines, and a recorded conversation about an illegal land sale." "Good," she replied. "We'd like you to come in and provide a statement. What you did, preserving that evidence, could make this case." When I arrived at the state office downtown, Lisa greeted me with a firm handshake. She led me to a small room where 2 other investigators waited. They asked about everything: the fines, the vandalism, the forged foreclosure notice, even the parking lot purchase. I gave them copies of every email, every photo, and the full audio file of Rick's conversation with the developer. Lisa leaned back in her chair afterward and said, "You may have saved more than just yourself. If these documents check out, he could face felony charges for embezzlement and fraud." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "So this isn't just an HOA issue anymore?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "It's criminal." The next morning, my phone started buzzing non-stop. A local reporter had somehow caught wind of the story. HOA president arrested for fraud and assault. Homeowner exposes scheme. By noon, it was all over social media. Neighbors who'd once ignored me were now tagging me in Facebook posts, calling me a hero, a fighter, even the woman who beat the HOA. It was flattering and uncomfortable. I hadn't wanted fame. I'd wanted fairness. But if the story helped other people realize what these power-hungry HOA boards were capable of, maybe it was worth it. That night, I sat on my porch under the soft buzz of the street lamp, sipping tea, scrolling through endless messages of support. For once, the silence of the neighborhood felt peaceful. Even the cicadas sounded like victory drums. Then came the knock, a soft, trembling knock at the door. I froze, phone still in hand, and glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Too late for visitors. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, clutching a worn leather purse. Her makeup was streaked from tears, her eyes puffy and red. "Mrs. Dalton?" I whispered, stunned. She nodded weakly. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't know what he was doing. I swear I didn't." I didn't move. She took a step closer, desperate. "They're saying he could go to prison for years. He's losing everything. Can't you tell them he's not a bad man? That it was just a mistake?" My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to protect the peace I'd fought so hard for. But another part saw something familiar in her eyes. Exhaustion, fear, that helplessness of being trapped under someone else's power. "I can't change the truth," I said quietly. "He made those choices. Not me." She covered her mouth, sobbing. "He'll destroy himself over this." "Maybe," I said, steady but not cruel. "But he already destroyed enough lives before it came back to him." As she turned to leave, I noticed her hand trembling on the railing. The porch light caught the tears on her cheeks, glinting like tiny shards of glass. When the door finally clicked shut behind her, I sank into a chair, my mind spinning. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was heavy. Because justice, I realized, doesn't come without scars. Rick avoided eye contact as the judge read out the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fans and the soft scratch of pens from reporters in the back row. I sat in the front, hands clasped in my lap, feeling every beat of my pulse as the judge's voice echoed through the wood-paneled room. Rick Dalton stood beside his attorney, eyes down, shoulders stiff, his once perfect hair now gray around the edges. The king of Maple Grove had finally run out of rules to hide behind. "Mr. Dalton," the judge said, adjusting his glasses, "this court finds you guilty of embezzlement, falsification of financial documents, and attempted fraud. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution to the Maple Grove Homeowners Association." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Rick's wife wept silently in the back row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Rick didn't turn to look at her. He just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched as if pretending none of this was real. The judge continued, "Furthermore, the court recommends that the current Maple Grove HOA board be dissolved, effective immediately, pending reorganization and independent audit." That line hit harder than the sentence itself, because for the first time, the structure that had terrorized my neighborhood was being dismantled, legally, publicly, and permanently. When the gavel finally came down, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Dana, my attorney, leaned over and whispered, "It's over. You won." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like closure. Heavy, necessary, bittersweet. Outside, the press swarmed as we left the courthouse. Microphones, cameras, and flashing bulbs surrounded me. "Sarah, how does it feel to bring down your HOA?" One reporter shouted. Another called out, "What message do you have for homeowners dealing with corrupt boards?" I paused just long enough to answer. "Document everything," I said firmly. "Learn your rights, and don't let anyone bully you out of your own home." That line made it to the evening news. Over the next month, the transformation in Maple Grove was nothing short of remarkable. Without Rick's iron fist, the neighborhood began to breathe again. The state-appointed trustee oversaw the HOA's reformation. New elections, new bylaws, full transparency. For the first time, homeowners actually had a say. I remember the day the HOA mailed out the official letter announcing refunds for unlawful fines. I opened mine at the same kitchen table where, a year earlier, I had opened Rick's first violation notice. Inside was a check for $3,200, every penny he'd ever fabricated. I laughed so hard I cried. Neighbors who had once avoided me now waved as they passed. Jim started volunteering to help repair the park benches that had fallen apart under Rick's neglect. Even Karen, the neighbor who once warned me to just pay up, brought me cookies and said, "You proved us all wrong." The lot I bought, Rick's prized possession, had become something of a symbol. Kids played there now. We'd added picnic tables and flower beds, planted a tree in the center, and built a small sign that read, "Community belongs to the people." It felt like healing. But just when I thought the story had finally reached its quiet ending, I got another letter. This time, neatly typed, no HOA logo, just a clean envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sheet. "To the owner of Lot 27B, we represent Horizon Development Partners. We'd like to make a formal offer to purchase your property. $50,000 cash. As is. $50,000, double what it was worth." My hand trembled as I read it. The same developer Rick had conspired with was back, and now they were coming straight to me. I folded the letter slowly, set it on the table, and stared out the window at the lot that had started it all. Justice had been served, but the game, it seemed, wasn't over yet. I stared at the offer letter, $500,000, and laughed. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about money anymore. The number gleamed up at me like a golden ticket. $500,000. Horizon Development Partners had apparently decided to skip negotiations and go straight for the jugular. $500,000 for the lot that started as a patch of asphalt. $500,000 for the same piece of land Rick once tried to sell behind everyone's back. I folded the letter and placed it next to my coffee mug. For a moment, I imagined what that money could do. Clear my mortgage, pay off debts, maybe even buy a small vacation cabin somewhere quiet. But then I looked out the window, at the sound of laughter floating across the street. Children were running across my lot. Our lot. Now a bright space filled with life instead of asphalt. After the trial, the community had rallied together to transform it. We tore up the cracked pavement, brought in soil and planters, and built raised garden beds. The first seeds were planted by veterans from the neighborhood. Men like Carl, who'd served overseas, and Jim, who'd spent his retirement years fighting for fairness in Maple Grove. We called it the Veterans Victory Garden. The transformation was something to behold. Rows of tomatoes, sunflowers, and basil replaced parking spaces and oil stains. The smell of fresh soil mingled with laughter. Every weekend, neighbors came out to help. Kids watering plants, parents chatting, volunteers painting benches and installing flags. It wasn't just a garden. It was a statement. This was what community looked like when people took it back. For the first time since moving into Maple Grove, I felt proud to live there. Proud of what we had endured, and even prouder of what we had rebuilt from the ashes of corruption. The HOA had been restructured completely, transparent, accountable, community-driven. No more secret meetings, no more fines for garden gnomes or mailbox colors. I'd been elected as the new chairperson, though I only accepted on one condition: no titles, no power games, just service. Every member's voice counted equally. Transparency became our new bylaw. Every budget posted online. Every vote recorded publicly. The best part? People began to trust again. Even Rick's old allies, those who once looked down on me, showed up with shovels and seedlings. We weren't enemies anymore. We were neighbors again. One afternoon, while tending the garden, I found myself watching Carl teaching a group of kids how to plant tomatoes. "You see, you gotta bury them deep," he said, his hands rough but gentle. "That's how they survive storms." His words struck deeper than he realized. That was me, buried deep in struggle, now standing stronger because of it. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the garden gold, I sat on one of the benches, reflecting on everything. The fines, the fear, the fight. Flashbacks flickered like scenes from a film. Rick shouting at me over my lawn, the vandalized fence, the courtroom verdict. I had been humiliated, threatened, isolated, but I never gave up. And in return, I'd earned something money could never buy: respect, peace, and purpose. Still, as I watched the flag ripple gently above the garden, I couldn't shake a feeling. That quiet before another storm. Later that night, as I sorted through the day's mail, a plain envelope caught my eye. No return address. Just my name in shaky handwriting that I recognized instantly. Rick Dalton. The letters were uneven, heavy, pressed too hard, like they were written with anger or regret. I stood there for a moment, frozen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Then slowly, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The first line read, "You think it's over, but you have no idea what you started." My hands went cold. The words bled into my chest like ice water. Rick might have been behind bars, but his shadow wasn't gone yet. "This isn't over," Rick wrote from prison, but for me, it finally was. The letter was short, angry, and full of the same arrogance that had once ruled Maple Grove. "You think you've won, but you just embarrassed powerful people. You'll see what happens when you cross them." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the same folder that held my first HOA fine. A neat, poetic reminder of how far I'd come. A year earlier, that letter would have terrified me. Back then, I was the woman who trembled when she saw a notice taped to her door. The woman who stayed up late worrying about bylaws she barely understood, afraid of losing everything she'd worked for. But now I just smiled, because fear only works when you let it silence you. I stepped out onto my porch, the cool, morning air brushing against my face. Across the street, the Veterans Victory Garden glowed in the early sun, green, alive, and full of people. Children were watering plants. Jim was chatting with Carl near the flagpole, and the smell of soil mixed with the faint sound of laughter. That space, the one Rick tried to sell, the one he thought he owned, had become a sanctuary, a symbol of what happens when ordinary people stand up to power and refuse to back down. For months, I'd received letters, emails, and messages from homeowners all over the country. Stories of their own battles with corrupt boards, unfair fines, and intimidation tactics. "You gave me the courage to fight back," one woman from Texas wrote. Another said, "My HOA tried to threaten me with a lien. Now I know what to do." Each message reminded me that this wasn't just my story. It was a pattern, a quiet war fought in neighborhoods across America. And maybe, in my own stubborn way, I'd helped start a rebellion. I poured a cup of coffee and sat on the porch steps, remembering the early days, Rick shouting about grass height, the fear, the sleepless nights, the humiliation. Every moment of weakness had forged something stronger in me. I didn't just win against Rick. I had learned how to fight, with truth, with persistence, and with the law on my side. That's what I wanted people to understand. You don't have to be rich, powerful, or connected to win against injustice. You just have to know your rights and refuse to be bullied out of them. If there was one thing I learned, it was this. Property ownership in America isn't just about land or houses. It's about dignity, about standing firm when someone tries to weaponize authority against you. I stood up, walked down to the garden, and ran my fingers through the soft petals of the sunflowers. They were tall now, taller than me. Every inch of them had grown from the soil of defiance, watered by perseverance. Rick's letter, as threatening as it tried to be, felt like an echo from a past that no longer controlled me. His words had no power here anymore. I looked around at the community that had once feared him, now united, strong, and alive, and I smiled. This isn't over, he'd written, but for me, it was. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rebuilding what someone tried to destroy and making it better than ever. I turned to the camera crew from the local news. They were doing a follow-up on Maple Grove's transformation, and said with a small grin, "Would you fight back like I did? Tell your HOA story below. You never know whose freedom your words might spark next." Then I glanced at the flag waving gently above the garden and added, "And stick around. Next, I'll tell you what happened when they tried to ban my American flag."